This is the AM Bite interview, and with us, we have the honor and pleasure of being joined by Dr. Rick Strassman to discuss his new book, My Altered State, a doctor's extraordinary account of trauma, psychedelics, and spiritual growth. Rick, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks, Miguel. My pleasure.
Pleasure is all ours. And with us, too, we've got Vance Sachi, the Moondoc. Vance, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm just fine. Looking forward to finding the spiritual aspect of the psychoactive substances.
Awesome. Well, Rick, let's start with tell us why you decided to write this book, a very personal book. At times I was like, as a recovering addict, I was like, some of this stuff I have confessed, but this is kind of leave it in AA or therapy, right? But
right,
you decided to let it all out, as they say, put it on the table.
Uncensored, unexpurgated. Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I suppose it was written mostly in the interest of presenting a more balanced view about altered states in general and psychedelics more specifically. There is a tendency, to glorify the psychedelic state or to demonize it. There isn't a lot of thorough, balanced exploration of the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the dark and the light of altered states. And I've been keeping notes of my altered states experiences ever since I was a young adult. And I've spent a lot of time in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, dredging up a lot of memories from those days. Yeah, and they're good stories. And I do try to use them as, teaching episodes. Like after every one of the narratives, I include a little commentary using the traditions and the disciplines that I've studied and learned about over the years. Psychopharmacology, Freudian psychology, Buddhism, and the medieval Jewish philosophers of all things. So I approach each of those, states once I'm done telling them, explaining how they came about, what they mean, what I learned from them, what I didn't learn from them.
Yeah, it's a very enjoyable and powerful read, and like you said, it's got a balance of how to approach it. I'm so glad you wrote down these experiences. Like, I never wrote down my first LSD trip or ecstasy, but I'm glad you did that too. But I was reading, the first part of your book, and I'm not sure if you're aware of the concept of the wounded healer in shamanism, the idea that it's an individual who you might say is broken. He's had especially in these tribes, they've had a near-death experience. They almost died. And somehow they become the leaders of the spiritual troubleshooters of the tribe. The channels are open, as they say. And I'm writing Elvis book is coming out. I'm writing a David Bowie book, and both were abused as children. Both had experiences. Obviously, one didn't make it. But it's almost like in the wounded healer, their wounds make them understand entheogens in the spiritual world. And sometimes they don't want to be cured because it's their pain that allows them to serve the tribe. And I thought of you that way. Your childhood, do you think your childhood, you were a wounded healer because of the abuse in your childhood? Or
yeah, I discuss a number of cases or experiences which involved abuse or imagined abuse, or visualizing the dysfunctional dynamics in my family as abusive, even though the specific things may not have occurred as such. Mm-hmm. So there is, the wounded healer part. And I think, when it comes to psychedelics, if you've had like a horrible psychotic experience and you've pulled through it, I think it can help you empathize with people going through the same thing. One of the reasons I always liked working with very sick psychotic people is because I could relate to them. I've been there, I've done that, I've worked through it, and I understand your pain. And let's get together and try to figure out a way of you getting out of here. Um, um, well, it's also a case, I think, of research being research. My interest in these drugs and these states, dovetails into my interest in chemistry and pharmacology. So once I got stoned on hashish for the very first time, I thought to myself, well, this is chemistry. I was, normal 5 minutes ago. And, now I'm in a completely different space, and it's a result of chemistry. So I, synthesize, those two interests in altered states and, chemistry, to develop, my career in psychopharmacology.
Yes, yeah, you discuss your first altered state at 19, smoking hashish. You were listening to Santana. Forget what song was it? Just out of
Well,
curiosity.
it was the album, the first, Santana album,
Yeah,
the black and white cover with a
right.
lion on it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good album. Good album.
Yeah. Uh, clouds were coming out of my speakers, and I just couldn't believe it. I said, this is new. Yeah. And I went on a flying carpet ride with my roommate, and we, shared the hallucination. It was completely, out there. Yeah, and I felt, calm and happy for the first time in my life. You're like, completely calm and completely happy. There was no ambiguity, no ambivalence. Yeah, so at the age of 18 or 19 years old, that kind of, in a lot of ways determined, my future career. I was interested in the drugs, and I was also interested in the states. So, that's where things kind of began.
Yeah, that's the interesting part. Like you, I remember doing LSD and feeling complete balance, complete okayness. Everything's all right. There was a sense, yeah, there was a balance in what I've been seeking all my life with the torment of childhood and growing up. But that's always a curious thing, isn't it, Rick? It's like I remember I listened to a rabbi a few weeks ago, and he said drugs are the solution, and I had to change my thinking because I always thought drugs is what destroyed my life. But then I realized they made me feel good. They made me feel like I belong, like I could think. So isn't that always the interesting part? Is I tell people drugs is not the solution or the destruction. It's just a portal or a companion. Or what attitude do you have?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would call them, the solution per se, but they can, be an introduction to the solution.
Mm-hmm.
They could kind of, point you in the direction that your life needs to go. There's a concept in Buddhism called bodhicitta,
Mm-hmm.
which is the first flash of enlightenment. In other words, it's the experience, that an enlightened state is potentially available to you. And it's your first, glance of that kind of alternate reality, which is much more grounded in reality than everyday, consensus consciousness. So in my case, that occurred on an LSD experience, an LSD trip when I was maybe 19 or 20. Yeah, so it still took me, years and years to discover a, Buddhist organization that I could study with and train with. But still, it was my first intimation of the possibility of an enlightened life, an enlightened state of mind.
Yes, and for the audience, it's not all serious. There's one story with you and LSD, I believe, in the fried chicken. That had
Hmm.
me laughing out loud. Could you share with the audience that?
Fried chicken, yeah. Well, yeah, it was the first psychedelic experience, which I'd ever had. It was at a party, at a girl's, um, dormitory. Yeah, and like I was, tripping for the first time in my life. Yeah, and there was a huge mound of fried chicken in the entryway, for us to eat, and like I was uncomfortable with the social setting, and kind of retired, just sitting on the bed, next to the chicken. And I was just looking at the chicken and the coleslaw and the potato salad and the beers under the table, and it just was amusing. And then my friends came in and started picking pieces of chicken off of this mountain of chicken, which I had dubbed Mount Chicken. Yeah, and I I could not believe that people were eating this chicken. I would say, that's fried chicken, right? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, and you're going to eat it? And they'd say, yeah, yeah. And I was just laughing so hard, I almost peed in my pants, actually. Yeah, it was just the most absurd thing I had ever seen.
Yeah, good times when we were in college. And in college, what were some of your defining moments? As you write in your book, I think your manifesto was another pivotal moment in your life, right?
Yeah, the manifesto that occurred when I was it was between my junior and senior years of college. Yeah, well, I became kind of messianic, actually. Like I was taking psychedelics. I mean, I loved them. I just, loved how I felt. And I thought, well, everybody should, feel this good. And I was also, just beginning, to learn about, Buddhism, Freudian psychology, psychopharmacology, so, I really, didn't know, what to do after graduating from college. Like all my friends were applying to medical school,
Hmm.
but my medical, career really had, very little interest, or, didn't have, much appeal. Like, like, I guess I'm what you might call a typical Aquarian.
Hmm.
I love humanity, but I'm not that crazy about people. Um, so yeah, it was one of those kinds of situations. Like I really wanted to cure mankind's illnesses, their distress, their dysphoria, with drugs, with psychoanalysis, with Zen Buddhism, with psychopharmacology. But the notion of being a doctor and working with individual patients just wasn't that interesting to me. So I was kind of in a bind. I didn't really know what to do. Yeah, so one afternoon, I took some acid, watched the sun go down. I mean, it came to me, that I would go to medical school in order to implement this messianic utopian kind of uh, model, which combined all of those things. Yeah, and I just wrote and wrote and wrote. It was 20 pages of free association. Yeah, and this was 1972. The Controlled Substances Act had passed only a couple of years previously,
Hmm.
and psychedelics had become anathema. They were horror drugs. And what was Buddhism exactly? Like monks were self-immolating in Vietnam to protest the war, and Freud was falling out of favor. So the manifesto was the basis of my application to medical school, and every chance I got with all of those interviews, which were 21 in total, 19 rejected me because they said, why do you want to be a doctor? And I said, oh, yeah, let me tell you. And yeah, the one school that I actually got into was a very brief interview, just a few minutes, because the interviewer was very busy. It was a remote interview. Yeah. So, yeah, well, and I went to medical school, and I got super depressed because there wasn't anything similar, to implementing the manifesto in medical school in the Bronx. I had moved out there from Northern California. Um, yeah, so I dropped out of school as a result of being pretty depressed, and ended up at the Zen monastery, which is the last uh, chapter in the book.
Yeah, yeah. And how did Zen Buddhism help you? Because even Vance and I were talking a couple of days ago. It's great for emptiness and realizing how pliable the self is. But of course, there's always the danger of nihilism. Everything casts a shadow, as you said. But how did
Right.
it help you, Rick?
Well, a couple ways, or maybe even three ways. One was that I established a relationship, with a very solid community of practitioners. Very sincere, very dedicated, very kind, very empathic, psychologically sophisticated.
Hmm.
They were peers, basically. Nearly all of them, like me, got their first flash of the potential of an enlightened way of life through psychedelics. And for almost all of them, their big psychedelic experiences were a stimulus, to become Zen monks. So, we shared a lot of experiences and background and perspectives. Um, Also, I learned to meditate, you know, which was quite, I mean, it was quite practical. Um, like I had gone, to another Zen community on a retreat a few months before that, and it was a Rinzai temple. There's a number of different types of Zen Buddhism out there. Rinzai focuses on what's called koan practice, which is things like what's the sound of one hand clapping, what was your face like before your parents met, those kinds of things. And those that kind of a practice seemed more suitable, to living in a monastery, and working on your koans.
Right.
The temple I ended up studying with was or um, is a Soto temple, and they emphasis or they emphasize this the koan of everyday life, which for example is why does the noisy breathing of your neighbor bothering you,
Mhm.
as opposed to what's the sound of one hand clapping.
Yeah.
They're related. You have to like
Yeah.
get a grip and let go of your preconceptions. But it was much more practical on an everyday kind of basis. And I thought, if like if I ever do return to medical school, um, I can't spend all my time, thinking about these koans. I need to
Mhm.
study, and I need to do the dishes, and I need to get a haircut, and I need to, speak to, my classmates and my teachers. So those were the koans, as opposed, to more abstract, kinds of things. Um, and also, my depression lifted, one day.
Mm.
I was, coming back, from a work project with some picks and shovels over my shoulder, and my depression just went away. Lifted off of my shoulders over the space of maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It just uh,
Mhm.
came up. It lifted up off of me, and I thought, that's interesting. I'm not feeling depressed anymore. So I kept it to myself, finished the day, went to sleep, woke up, and I still felt pretty good. So, up until then, I was thinking, that all I, might be good for was to become a monk. I would just, cloister myself, not interact, with the outside world anymore. That's all I was good for. I'd just be a monk, meditate all day, clean out, the toilets and
Right.
whatnot. Yeah, but after my depression lifted, I thought, well, gee, I've been working on all this, medical stuff for all these years, and my interest in, healing and things. Yeah, so within a few days, I decided to return to medical school. My relationships, with the monks was extremely helpful after that too, because I could ask them questions like, what do I do in a subway if somebody steps on my foot? Um, so yeah, it was quite practical. Yeah, and I went back to medical school, and I was a studying machine. Like when studying, just study. Yeah, and I got great grades, and you know all of that.
Did you
Good deal.
continue the
Yeah.
trip? Yeah, or had you given that up?
Yeah, I stopped. Like the last couple of months of school, like after I was accepted into my residency of choice, I kind of let down my guard a bit and started smoking pot again. Yeah, and I continued during my residency. I tripped a few times as a resident, when I was training. But then I you know, uh, then I got back, more seriously into it. Once I moved to New Mexico in, the mid 1980s, I was a member, or I belonged, or joined in, with a small group of therapists and psychiatrists and lawyers and psychologists, that were taking new psychedelics, as well as the older ones, and exploring them interpersonally and spiritually.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I always suggest people meditation has really helped my life. Glad you didn't do the spiritual bypassing, as they call it. And your story reminds me of, Aldous Huxley when he did peyote and he's like communing with the universe and he's looking over. He's like, oh, somebody's got to clean those dishes in my sink. I got
Right.
to come down. I got to come down to my life, even though where I am, I'm so much happier. So we all have responsibilities, right, Rick? A mission.
Yeah, you can't, well, spiritual, bypassing. Yeah, it's a common thing with, folks who take psychedelics. And it's
Yeah.
also, the case with, hardcore meditators. You might have an enlightenment experience and, decide you don't need therapy, and you don't need, to tidy up your interpersonal, relationships. Yeah, so, once I returned to medical school, I realized, I still need help, so I found psychotherapist, worked with him for a couple of years. My speech was causing some problems on rounds, and I got a speech therapist, which was quite helpful. Um, so I was quite grounded in my problems, and was interested in dealing with them at a real practical level.
Good deal. Good deal. Yeah. And in your book, you talk about how, and I could relate to this, Rick, you had a sense of you're always looking for danger and living on the edge, obviously from your childhood. Was it therapy when you're able to identify this sort of characteristic about yourself?
Um, not initially. It took a couple of years of psychoanalysis
Yeah.
later on. Yeah. Which occurred in my early 30s, mid 30s. Yeah, one day my analyst was, describing, the kind of women, or the kinds of situations I was interested in, and he said, "Exciting but dangerous." Yeah, so I learned the hard way about that trait.
Oh, indeed, indeed. And then later on, you went back or started embracing or going back to Judaism. And I love in your book, you talk about Maimonides, a great philosopher. I've always liked everything he's done. So Judaism, mystical Judaism, how did it help you for the audience?
Well, there were a couple of reasons that I returned to my Jewish roots. Like, I was, raised in a conservative, Jewish household. There's like, three main, streams of Judaism. There's Reform, which is quite liberal.
Mhm.
There's Orthodox, which is, quite conservative, and the one in the middle is, called conservative Judaism, even though it isn't as conservative as Orthodox. I was bar mitzvah, went to a Hebrew day camp in Los Angeles, all that. But then I got my braces off and got contact lenses and started running, track, and was popular and things. So I stopped my Jewish involvement. Um, One other thing, as well, is there wasn't much in the way of spirituality in my Jewish education. I was spending 6 hours a week from 5 to 13 in a Hebrew day school, or
Mhm.
Jewish day school. But there wasn't much emphasis on spirituality, per se.
Right.
There was culture, and the holidays, the ritual, some of the Bible, but mostly historical. There was an emphasis on World War II, the Holocaust, the establishment of the uh, state of Israel. But like actual experiential, communing with the divine was fairly absent,
Yeah.
from the curriculum. So then went to college, learned about meditation, learned about Buddhism, and went whole hog into that. Um, yeah, so as I got older, and as my DMT studies progressed, things began to shift. With respect, to the DMT work, my volunteers and I were both expecting a Kensho-like experience, an enlightenment experience. No self, no content,
Right.
no time, no space, no body, no feelings. Yeah, and most of the volunteers in this study were practitioners of some kind of Eastern meditation. Well, and so was I. So we all expected that. But DMT is quite full of content, and you maintain your personality and you interact with your personality with the contents of that state. So in a lot of ways, the opposite of a Kensho experience,
Mm.
Satori. So Buddhism, theoretically or model wise, wasn't really doing it. Plus, as I was growing up, as it were, spiritually, the bowing of the practice in a Zen communities, Zen temple, was beginning to bother me. Like these big, golden Buddha statues, bowing to them all the time, bowing to each other,
Right.
bowing to bodhisattva, statues in the hall, bowing to each other. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to be, bowing, I would rather, bow to the Most High as opposed to statues.
Mm-hmm.
And the story or the explanation was, oh, you're bowing to these qualities in yourself, whatever. But I didn't really buy that, or it just didn't really ring true. Um, so also, politically, the monastery was becoming increasingly, hierarchical. There were,
Mm-hmm.
red monks and yellow monks and white monks and all that. With with the different colored robes. The teacher was becoming increasingly inaccessible as well. Yeah, so it was beginning over time to be like any other religion. So the bowing, the lack of a good, model, and the bowing and the lack of a good model were, kind of, chafing at me. Yeah,
Right.
so we parted ways over the whole issue of psychedelic experiences and their relevance, to Buddha's practice. It was okay if we were just speaking one to one about these things, but once I actually began, my study, um, and you began writing and speaking about the relationship of psychedelics to Buddhist practice. It was it was a hot potato for the monastery. They just did not want to conflate drugs and Buddhism. Especially like I'm a member of the community. Like, was I speaking for them?
Right.
Those kinds of issues. Um, so I said, well, can't we, I said, well, couldn't we just talk about it? And they said, no, this is not science, this is a religion, that we're talking about. And, we don't, challenge, the basic beliefs of religion. You can do that within, the scientific model, but they're
Mm-hmm.
different animals. So we parted ways, kind of uncomfortably, actually. They had, more or less, saved my life, 22, 23 years before.
Mm-hmm.
Like I got married there. I helped
Oh.
establish an affiliated meditation group in Sacramento. Yeah, all those things. The master, stayed at my house once or twice. They gave grand rounds, to psychiatry back then. Yeah, so it was a painful separation, but also it was overdue. The bowing was getting to me, the model, and and also the increasing politicalization of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I stumbled upon a book about Kabbalah in the local bookstore, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. It reminds me of my Jewish upbringing, plus it's much more sophisticated, than
Hmm.
anything I had ever come across as a kid. Yeah, so that led me to begin reading the Hebrew Bible, and you can't read the Hebrew Bible without a scorecard, without a lot of scorecards, because it's a very difficult text to crack.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I began reading the medieval commentators, and then ended up studying Maimonides, who was this brilliant philosopher, physician, community leader, um, in 1200s. I think Fostat, um, in what was Egypt at the time.
Indeed. Indeed. So it was the sound of one foot walking out of Zen Buddhism, I suppose. Vance, what
Well,
do you, I'm sorry.
more like one foot giving me the boot.
That's more graphic, yeah. Vance, do you have any questions, or what do you think?
Oh yeah. Well, I was curious. Maybe I'm getting ahead of our conversation, but um, spirit molecule and
Mhm.
spirit. What is spirituality for you? What do you mean by spirituality?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, but because a lot of people just bandy around the notion of
Yeah.
spiritual. Well, it can be described or defined in a number of ways. Um, one could be feelings and ideas that relate to the highest possible values, like compassion and love and empathy, charity, justice, those kinds of things. Um, feelings and ideas which relate to those notions. Uh, also, I think it can relate to things which are usually invisible, but are felt.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like spirit, angels, the soul, God, those kinds of things.
Right.
So I think it combines both cognitive qualities and emotional perceptual qualities.
So, do you think the psychoactive compounds and so forth actually tap into real spirituality, or the things that you experience on the trips? Are those does it make those entities manifest, to the senses? That's interesting
Hmm.
to me.
Yeah. Well, I think any specific um, or, or any individual psychedelic experience is the result of setting and the
Right.
dose of the drug. So if you're a spiritual person in the first place, and you read spiritual texts, your friends are spiritually oriented, you occupy yourself with spiritual ideas and feelings, then I think psychedelics you may give a jump start or amplify, or they could turbocharge your interest and experiences of those kinds of things. I think there is a risk of mistaking certain feelings for true spirituality. So for example, you may feel love, and you may feel a sense of awe, those kinds of things, without any specific object. And you believe that you've become a more spiritual person simply as a result of having those feelings. But it isn't only feelings. You need to have some psychological um, overlay, as it were. Like, what do you love? Who do you love? What do you
Yeah.
feel empathy for? Um, then I think is one of those spiritual bypassing issues. That if you feel enlightened, does that mean you are enlightened? And I think oftentimes is just the opposite. Um, so those kinds of feelings, I think, uh, um, need to be um, they need to be attached, as it were, to something concrete, that you can actually communicate and think about and relate.
Something that results in actual improvements in your life, something that drives you to be a better person, so to speak.
Yeah, to become a better person and to hopefully make the world a better place as a result of those experiences.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, you can manipulate that state in any which way you want, depending on your intention and the intention of the folks around you. The case in point I like to bring up is Charles Manson. And his followers. They took a lot of LSD, and he just inculcated in them this really strange worldview, and they followed him because of the increasing meaningfulness of those ideas, which were more or less undeveloped, nascent in their minds in the first place, but under the influence of psychedelics, they became more solidified and more meaningful.
Indeed. And yeah, you mentioned setting, and control. I think that's an important one. Can you explain a little bit more? Because I think even talking about our lives and experimenting, I think that's a good framework for any sort of entheogen use.
Yeah, well, so so the set is who you are at the time of your experience, your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual health. Your setting is the circumstances. Like, is it indoors, outdoors, with friends or with strangers, or with or with enemies, people that you're not comfortable with.
Mhm.
Research environment or spiritual environment. Like in the country, in the city. Um, and the third leg is the drug. Is it MDMA? Is it LSD? Is it high potency marijuana? Is it ketamine? Which also includes the dose. Is it a small dose, a medium dose, or a high dose? Um, so like I spend a lot of time in my 2022 book, the Psychedelic Handbook.
Mhm.
The largest of the chapters in that book is about how to trip, how to get ready, how to experience the effects, what to do if you get into any tight spots, and the question of integration. How do you make sense of it and apply it later on?
Definitely check it out. And in your book too, Rick, you talk about studying some altered states, and you bring some of people that I, of course, have read and I say admired, fascinated by: Charles Bukowski, William
Mhm.
Burroughs, big
Right.
influence, very Gnostic, big influence on David Bowie. But you also bring Carl Jung, who obviously had his own altered state without psychedelics. What do you think of Jung's Red Book, or has Jung affected your research or even your therapy well-being?
Um, well, when the Red Book first came out, I started looking at it, and it just seemed way too much. Uh, so I just put it down, and I
Right.
haven't
We weren't ready.
returned to it. Yeah, my understanding of the Red Book is it's a collection of drawings and musings which occurred over a 3-year period. Of a fairly altered state. Some people describe it as a spiritual breakthrough, others as madness. So take your pick.
Right.
Yeah, but Jungian psychology, has never really appealed to me, and
Mhm.
and I think one of the reasons is it treats your life as if it were something else. It isn't your life; it's your relationship to the archetypes.
Mhm.
Um, when I was in private practice, some years back, um, and it was mostly a psychotherapy practice. I would occasionally, pick up patients, who, had been in Jungian analysis, and they all talked about their dreams. They didn't, talk about their everyday life, which would be very frustrating, to me, like, what about your wife? What about your husband? What
You're a
about,
boss.
what
Yeah.
about your bills? Yeah. And they say, oh, it's, the pueri turnus or it's Ariadne. It's like, not really. It's, like it's you. Yeah. So, that, never, really appealed to me. Freudian, psychology was much more attractive because it, deals with your childhood and your current relationships and your relationship with the therapist, very, cut and dried in a lot of ways.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And I know Jung was, he wrote favorably towards entheogens. I think it was pretty briefly. Again, he was another era. He didn't get to enjoy when it broke through. And what would you say you've been such a pioneer in this field and broken so much open, and the world should be very grateful for all the work you've done. But what do you think, if you had a state or a declaration of how we are today, what would you say, Rick? Because on one hand, yes, psychedelics and therapy through entheogen is just breaking through. It's accepted more and more. We even had recently Tricia Eastman, and she does a lot of lobbying for psychedelics, and she's like, I can go to both Republicans and Democrats, and they're both very happy to give me money to fund these things. So
Right.
I never thought I'd see the day. At the same time, addiction is higher, depression is higher in the collective. So what, are we in a good place or a bad place, or what do you think?
I think it's kind of hanging in the balance. Yeah, my Zen teacher always used to say it's 51-49. 51 good, 49 bad, which
Yeah.
which is a call for each individual to do what they can. It isn't as if any of us could be considered insignificant. Yeah, well, and it is interesting. There is beginning to be some backlash against psychedelics.
Mm,
Ketamine is becoming better known as an addictive drug in some circumstances. People are reporting more and more adverse effects. Some thorough studies are beginning to reveal the prevalence of adverse effects. So back in the 60s, the psychedelics became wonder drugs. Like everybody said, everybody should trip. They'll help everybody with everything.
right.
Then they became horror drugs with the demonstrations and all the social and the social unrest which was occurring back then. So they became your horror drugs, and after that they were just forgotten about. So I think the pendulum is beginning to swing, and hopefully they won't become horror drugs, and hopefully they won't be forgotten. I think I think the scientific community learned from the mistakes of the past. They're not like overreaching. But I think at the same time, it's very appealing to be considered like an expert on saving the world. So you can be not especially grounded, and talk about how great psychedelics are, which then sets up unreasonable expectations, which are bound to be dashed. So I think there's still the risk of unscrupulous types exploiting the
Yeah.
the enthusiasm. But the scientific community has been more cautious. The media was kind of glowing early on, Michael Pollan's book and all that. But I think they're starting to cast a more wary look at the field, but it still is, like if you were to describe any kind of backlash, it would be, only, the earliest, stages. Vermont, for example, refused, to, legislate, for psychedelic medicine. Massachusetts, did as well.
Mm,
A number of counties in Colorado, and in Oregon are refusing, to let clinics open. So there is more caution, I think, that we're seeing now.
Yeah, I had a question. Is it have there been any studies that um, look at what kind of effects long term it has on brain physiology? As you know, the old fear that it's going to be damaging your brain or whatever else like that. What's your view on that?
Yeah. Well, the classical compounds like LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, uh, DMT, they seem to be safe, for the brain if you take them only here and there, only occasionally. Um, there is some theoretical concern about microdosing every day or every other day. That it may potentially cause some cardiac problems, especially with the valves in the heart. But there isn't any human evidence that that's the case. It's more theoretical. So MDMA, if you take too much, is neurotoxic. There's not much question about that. Yeah, ketamine. It's unclear, what the long-term effects would be on the brain of repeated ketamine use. There are other problems like bladder problems, specifically
Mhm.
with overdoing it with ketamine. But the classic compounds seem to be safe. Back in the the horror, the stage of psychedelics becoming horror drugs. There were concerns about chromosome damage,
Mm.
but that never held up. And the brain damage literature was fairly weak, and there isn't any evidence.
How about flashbacks?
Yeah, you can have flashbacks, which are recurrences of certain aspects of the psychedelic experience long after the drug has worn off. That is currently being called hallucinogen or post hallucinogen perceptual disorder,
Mm.
which I think is a misnomer, because you know uh, flashbacks uh, can involve other modalities other than purely perceptual. You can have anxiety, like you may have felt at certain times of your trip. You can have deja vu. You feel like you're tripping again. Um, you can, yeah. So um, those sequelae aren't only perceptual. Um, they occur. It's pretty rare, but they usually occur with a lot of use. Although there are cases of them starting after even one use, especially if it was a traumatic experience. It shares a lot with PTSD if it was a traumatic psychedelic experience. You can you can feel as if you're uh, reliving the trauma of an unpleasant psychedelic experience. Yeah, I'm not sure what I would call the the prevalence. It's under 1% for sure, and there you, you, you- um and if you read the research um uh literature, like the results of studies which occurred in a research environment. If you can believe their reports, there haven't been many case reports of flashbacks. If you're screened carefully, your experiences carefully supervised, and you have some time to integrate the experience in the context of some skilled therapists.
All right.
Wonderful. Well, as we get to the end of the interview, Rick, what do you hope the reader will get out of your book? We so much we haven't covered, but I enjoyed it. What do you want? What should people understand?
Well, I suppose a couple of things. Don't discount your experience. Both good and bad. Like if you've had a painful experience in your life, don't ignore it. Like, pay attention, document it. Or if you've had a positive experience with drugs or with alcohol or being in love or in therapy, you should document it. Think about it. Chew on it. So that's one take home. Like, don't deny or minimize the value of all your experiences, as especially the extraordinary ones. And I suppose the other is get help if you need it. And you can find out if you need help, based on the the nature of your extraordinary mental states. So pay attention and get help when you need it, I suppose, or the two take homes.
Good advice for sure. Definitely good advice. Vance, any last question from you, or how you doing?
Yeah, I got a bombshell question to end with, which is
a bombshell. Well, let me have a drink of water before that.
Good, yeah. So, in all your experiences, did you ever run into the mystical experience? And I mean by mystical, not just the occult, and I'm interested in all these interesting things, but the unitive consciousness type experience?
Yeah. Well, so one time, in particular, I was in the wilderness in, let's see. It occurred in my early 30s or so. I was in the Gila wilderness in southwest New Mexico, and I took way too way too many mushrooms. And I had to lay down, and I had a close friend on either side. And I just went into the white light, and I stayed there for maybe half hour or so. And it was interesting. One of the things which came to me during that experience was one of the lines from one of the Zen scriptures that we recited every day, which was, even the slightest twitch will surely break the rhythm. So every every time I pulled back and witnessed and was thinking about the white light, it just kind of went away. And so when I stopped thinking and judging and analyzing and assessing, I went back into it. So that became clear to me, the meaning of that verse. But that was probably the most striking example of being in the white light for any period of time.
Very good. Very interesting.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks for sharing. Well, we are at the end. Yeah, I certainly recommend My Altered States. Good read. I'm glad it came out into the world. But first of all, Vance, thanks for keeping us company on this trip.
Oh, my pleasure. And great to meet you, Dr. Strassman.
Well, thanks, Vance. My pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much for coming on the show, Rick. And where I will have this on the show notes. Where do you want to send people? Your website, Inner Traditions?
Well, for starters, they can look at my website, rickstrassman.com. I sell books on my site. I'll inscribe and sign them. And you can buy the book or a number of my books through Amazon, through the publisher, Inner Traditions, Barnes and Noble, the usual suspects.
Indeed. Well, awesome. And again, it's on the show notes right now, whether you're watching this or listening to this on a podcast in the audio version. So check it out. Check out Rick's work. It's important, and we hope it continues to break ground. And yes, thank you very much, Rick, for coming on the show. We appreciate your time and your work and your sharing of your experiences.
Well, sure. Thank you very much, too.
Join Patreon, AB Prime, or Red Circle and get full episodes and podcast summary and other cool bonuses. Clean, edited episodes on a private RSS feed. And no more commercials. Support Aeon Byte.